Hey everyone, Tactics here, and today is basically WoW Christmas because the alpha notes for Midnight have dropped, meaning we've got an insane amount of tank changes to go over here in this video, with almost every single tank spec receiving either significant reworks, talent shuffles for their class tree, spec tree, or sometimes all of the above. Now, because so much is going on here, I'm going to save the hero talent tree talk for a separate video, probably coming out tomorrow or the day after, just because there's obviously a lot going on with that stuff as well, with an entire new column being added to every single hero spec. So the focus here is just going to be baseline changes to tanks, as well as talent changes that we're going to be seeing. As a note, you'll probably notice that I'm looking at Wowhead links here because I do not personally have access to the alpha. And while that's not going to stop me from yapping, for a lot of these changes, it is kind of hard to see without actually playing the spec itself with those changes what the impact is going to be like. Things like proc rates, we have no idea of. We don't know how the stat squish coming in midnight is going to impact the output of some of these abilities based on their like attack power scaling versus health scaling, as we saw going into the War Within, just as an example. And of course, it's an alpha, not even a beta, so keep in mind all of this is subject to change. Anyways, let's go right into it here, starting with Blood DKs. Obviously, the UI interface here, a bit hard to read, so I'm going to walk you through everything here. And the changes, I've got the new talent trees on the left, the notes, and the old talent trees on the right to kind of give you that comparison. So for Blood DKs, big blurb here on the right, paraphrasing here, basically their goal is to increase Blood's baseline durability while slightly reducing the healing output of Deathstrike specifically. And part of that is changing Bone Shield to be strictly a defensive resource as opposed to a mixed offensive and defensive resource. So they're removing Shattering Bone, as well as some of the things that consumed Bone Shield like Bone Storm and Tombstone. Both of those are gone. Instead, Bone Shield is strictly defensive. Now, something kind of collateraling all tanks to a degree is the defensive purge, which, as we're seeing on this alpha build, has happened. They've removed a lot of the defensives in the game. And so for Blood DKs, what they're losing is just Lichborn DR. So Lichborn's no longer going to have a DR tied to it. So that is what is affecting Blood specifically. Not really many other class changes for Death Knights. So we're just going to hop straight into the actual spec tree for Blood, which has seen quite a few changes. So first off, the Bone Shield stuff I was talking about, that was removed. And so in its place down here, I can show it down here in the bottom leftish area, we're having Blood Mist, which some people may see kind of familiar. It is essentially a passive version of the Venthyr ability. So it's this little thing around you, gives you some parry while it's active, and then it's going to give you some runic power, and then with the second talent point, it's going to blow up and then heal you for that explosion with the damage increased for runic power spent. So we're getting that back. I don't really like the decision to tie this to Dancing Rune Weapon, to be honest with you, because you are so strong in your Dancing Rune Weapon window already, and just adding more power to that window I think is a little bit odd. I'm sure Sand Lane is really going to like this, but I kind of would prefer this to like be a after your Dancing Rune Weapon expires situation, or maybe even just a separate button. But it does seem like they are kind of removing button presses across the board here as well, as we'll see across several specs. So maybe they want to avoid adding an extra button, but I'm just personally not a fan of it being tied to Dancing Rune Weapon specifically. Speaking of Dancing Rune Weapon, there are some changes coming there, mostly CDR related, as it's no longer going to be based off Bone Shield consumption, as we talked about. There's changes to that, and now it's just a flat 30-second CDR. This is going to mean your rune weapon uptime is probably going to be lower, right? You're not going to be able to get those massive bursts of CDR by consuming Bone Shields or just by having them naturally consumed by getting hit, right? So that is going to be impactful. But again, the goal here is that the baseline durability is up, so being in Dancing Rune Weapon specifically is less important. Continuing on these talents in the bottom left that have kind of replaced things. So we have a couple talents here now focused around Blood Boil. So you've got Hard Strike has a chance to give you a big Blood Boil essentially, and your Blood Plague crits have a chance to CDR Blood Boil. So a couple more interactions with Blood Boil. You will notice Rune Tap is going to be gone, I believe, and in its place, I think this is where it would have been, is Deadly Reach. So this is Death Strike can now hit 2 additional enemies. Very, very nice. One of the nice bonuses of that tier bonus in Liberation of Undermine was the cleaving Death Strikes, and now you can opt into those cleaving Death Strikes, which, you know, in the raid obviously you'll probably avoid unless there's a cleave fight. But this is a nice talent to have. I'm glad to see these kinds of talents kind of appear in the tree. Another talent that is appearing in the tree, A-Bomb's Limb, is back here. So this is on a choice node with Gorfien's Grasp, which notably has now had the Tightening Grasp silence effect rolled into it, which is definitely nice. The big thing to note is it's not a damage cooldown. This is just a pure utility node. But I do think it's funny that they're just re-giving the massive death grip advantage back to Blood DK. Obviously, A-Bomb's Limb is going to be kind of niche value, right? Like, there are certain fights where it's really, really good. But now you can basically have a Blood DK with A-Bomb's Limb solo grips, whereas before you needed like 2 DKs to solo. Like, for example, Dementia's platforms, right? You could have a Blood DK kind of solo a set with A-Bomb's Limb up, which is, you know, it's interesting they're moving and bringing this back. Obviously, there's no damage tied to it whatsoever, but I was very surprised to see this make a return. So I would love to see what the DPS DKs feel about Blood specifically getting A-Bombs, unless they got it too. I don't believe the other DK specs got it too. I could be wrong, but yeah, very, very interesting to see nonetheless. The other really interesting thing I saw was consumption has been changed to an empower ability. So you are now charge this up. You get a flat DR while you're charging it up, and that DR will last for several seconds beyond the actual cast completing, which was kind of interesting to see. It also is now consuming duration of your Blood Plague instead of making it speed up. So another thing to note. So this will be interesting to test out. I wonder, I'm really curious how this is going to affect the flow of the gameplay of Blood, as I haven't personally played with any empower abilities. I know obviously they made very briefly Breath of Sindragosa an empowered ability on the PTR for 11.2, and that was eventually reverted. So we'll see how this plays out. I'm not 100% sold on it, but I'm not going to rule it out entirely yet. Now, a couple talents I am kind of a bit surprised made it in are Leeching Strikes here and Blood Feast, which has been moved across the way here. I don't know why these exist. Obviously, again, they've said Blood Strike or Death Strike is going to heal for a little bit less now, but I don't really see a world where these are super, super valuable, and I am a bit confused, not gonna lie. Maybe you could argue this could be, I don't know, decent if you're hard striking a lot in AoE situations, but still, I don't know. I'm not a big fan of these talents. I would have liked to seen these get removed and replaced with things. But overall, I think there's definitely some cool stuff going on here, and some stuff that I am interested to see how it actually plays out. Now, Blood DK is one of the few specs that has their Apex talent available, so let's go over that quickly here. So initially, the first point you put in is Dance of Midnight. While Dancing Rune Weapon is active, parrying an attack has a chance to make your next hard strike free and deal 150% increased damage. So we're, again, doubling down on Dancing Rune Weapon stuff, which is going to be the theme of this Apex talent. Not sure how happy I am to see that, but the last point is pretty interesting. Let's move on to the next one, though, which is a 2-point node. For each Dancing Rune Weapon active, your damage is increased by 3 or 6% per point. And your damage taken is reduced by 2 or 4%. So again, more offensive and defensive power in your Dancing Rune Weapon, which Sand Lane's super happy. When you have 2 of these weapons active, that doubles. So it's going to be 12% damage and 8% DR if you have both points in this, which is not a small amount, so something to consider. But then we get to the last point, which is very interesting. When you consume a rune, you have a chance to call a Dancing Rune Weapon to your aid for 6 seconds. The big question mark still, what is the proc rate? We have no idea. That is going to make or break this ability. This could be insanely OP. This could be solid in Mythic Plus, bad in Raid. This could be good for Sand Lane, maybe bad for Deathbringer, that kind of thing, depending on how it interacts with the Sand Lane stuff. I assume it's not going to interact with Blood Mist, since it specifically says when you cast Dancing Rune Weapon. But that would also be an interesting interaction if this could proc Blood Mist. I doubt it, but potentially something that could solve a lot of the issues in Mythic Plus, at least, that Blood DKs have been talking about, when combined with all these other changes, making them baseline tankier and less reliant on being in Dancing Rune Weapon specifically, but still a nice boost to obviously be in Dancing Rune Weapon. So really, really interested to test this out. Maybe Blood DKs will finally be able to go back and push those giga high keys like they were doing at the end of Shadowlands. Would be great to see. But that's blood. That is the initial change for blood. Again, we'll talk about the hero trees in my next video. Let's move on to Demon Hunters. Okay, magic. We did it. So, some baseline changes to Demon Hunter class. One, a lot of their stuff is not implemented in the class tree, the capstone area of the class tree, and that is because they've shuffled a lot of things to be baseline into specs or in the spec tree specifically. So Sigil Flame is now Vengeance only. Sigil of Spite has moved to the Vengeance tree. The Hunt has moved to the DPS trees, and so they're not there. So that is something to keep in mind with the Hunt moving to the DPS trees. I believe the Hunt is probably something that Vengeance is no longer going to have access to. So that is something to consider there. And then just generally there's been like a light shuffle, but not really a ton of actual changes to the talents themselves, mostly because they're not implemented in the tree as you can see here. Let's move on to the Vengeance tree specifically, though, because this is one that I think has gotten some pretty interesting changes. Obviously, Annihilator, we'll talk about that in the next video. Main goal here, again, big blurb. They've done this for a lot of tank specs, which is nice to see. They want to streamline the defensive kit of Vengeance to help with kind of the gaps that are common with the spec that lead to, defensive issues. So things like demon spikes, they want to make easier to maintain. They want the defenses to be much easier to understand as well. And they want your defensive ramp up time to be lower. So specifically calling out things like frailty there without actually saying it. Now let's talk about frailty because things have changed. So one has moved down to be further down in the bottom left of the tree. This is kind of the frailty area now. A few things to notice. One, frailty is now going to be baseline 8 seconds across the board. I think previously some of them were 6 seconds, some of them were 8 seconds. It's now 8 seconds across the board from your Sigil of Flame, your Soul Cleave, and your Spirit Bomb. The other thing is that frailty, the bottom talent here, doesn't make it stack. It just doubles the effects. And so, one, obviously that's the big target at the ramp up time. Two, obviously with the old numbers, that would have been kind of not great. And so they've buffed up the numbers on some of these abilities. So for example, the vulnerability damage is now 3 and 6%. And if we move to the Vengeance tree, there we go. It was, I believe, 2 and 4. So it's now up to 6%. It's going to double to 12%. So you would need to have 3 stacks of frailty in order to have this be equivalent, essentially. So again, the high end here has been reduced, but the floor has been brought significantly up in order to just reduce that ramp up time. Void Reaver is up 1% to 4%, which I believe this before was 3%. Yeah, and 6 seconds, so it's up to an 8-second duration. And then Painbringer is also moved up to 3 and 6% for 8 seconds, where before it was 1 or 2% for 6 seconds, or up to 8 seconds. For 6 seconds with overlapping. It no longer overlaps, so it's just 6% DR when you consume a soul fragment. So again, equivalent to 3 stacks of the previous version. Ceiling down, floor up. Now there are some baseline changes to Vengeance specifically. So Feldev caught a very significant buff, 15% of the damage, but 600% of the healing. I guess they're really trying to make the healing here very relevant. Demon spikes, duration up to 12 seconds. Up from 8, and obviously cooldown affected by haste. And then Mastery has just gotten a 25% buff there as well. Deflecting spikes is also now a baseline, and I believe Fracture is baseline as well, because I haven't been able to find in the tree, so I just kind of assume that is also a baseline ability. Speaking of the tree, it's had some things kind of adjusted around. So like we talked about, Sigil of Spite is over on the tree now. This is the Spirit Bomb position, because Spirit Bomb has been moved up to basically the top of the tree, and Spirit Bomb is actually different now. It's been reworked. So let's find the text on Spirit Bomb here for a second. Here it is. So it's now a baseline 25-second cooldown affected by haste. It deals a larger amount of damage, increased by 20% per soul consumed, meaning it's now more like a big damage hit that you're going to want to hit anytime it's off CD, as opposed to, the AoE replacement button, right? But it was kind of weird. Spirit Bomb, Soul Cleave, they did kind of similar things. Obviously, Spirit Bomb hit all the targets. Soul Cleave didn't. That's another change that's happened now. Soul Cleave is now no longer hard target capped at 5, thank God. It will now just deal reduced damage beyond 5, which is how it should have been to begin with. That will hopefully help with threat, as will this burst of Spirit Bomb, right? This big burst of upfront damage that you can do basically as soon as you generate your 5 soul fragments. Big damage burst. That'll help with threat a lot as well. Very nice to see. Another significant change to Demon Hunter is the functionality of Fiery Brand. So this is now going to buff yourself and debuff the target. So the buff on yourself is what the DR is tied to. It's no longer tied to the target you're putting it on. You gain the 40% DR, so it's a much better defensive button. The damage still happens. It's still tied to the target you put it on, so you get a prior target. You can still spread this around with your down and or burning alive here at the bottom, so you can still do damage via that. But that's not what the defensiveness is, so you don't have the ramp up time. Again, the ramp up time here of your defensive capabilities from Firebrand is gone. Now, they've also gotten rid of your illuminated sigils, so Down in Flames is now the only talent available down here instead of illuminated sigils, which is probably going to be a pretty popular talent if I had to guess. There's another new talent down here in Vengeful Beast. Metamorphosis now is 5 seconds longer, and it also increases the damage of your Soul Cleave and Spirit Bomb by 30%. So again, adding some offensive capabilities to Metamorphosis. Believe Feed the Demon, Feed the Demon was down there. It's been moved up in the tree and reworked. It's now based off Fury spent as opposed to Souls consumed, I believe. So just still Demon Spike CDR, and with that 12-second duration on Demon Spikes as well baseline, I think it's probably going to be much easier just right from the get-go to have Demon Spikes up 100% of the time. There are a couple other reworks to abilities here. So Ascending Flame is now just flat all sigil flame damage instead of just the initial damage and the overlapping stuff. So no more overlapping. Fellfire Fist is actually a new talent entirely, where your Infernal Strike out of combat and within 5 seconds of entering combat is going to drop Sigil Flame. So I wonder if there's an ICD on this, or if you want to enter combat with like both your Infernal Strikes and just Infernal Strike would be kind of interesting here, just to like spread your Sigil Flame out, or on grouping even, because obviously if you're Infernal Striking into combat or shortly after entering combat, your Sigil Flame aggro should hopefully hurt or work correctly rather, and maybe that'll help with that situation. The other rework talent here, Soul Barrier, is now an absorb shield based on Spirit Bomb, so it's no longer a non-use ability. You just, whenever you Spirit Bomb on that 25-second cooldown or lower affected by haste, you get a big absorb shield from Soul Barrier, which potentially it gives it a use case. Soul Sigils also moving over from the class tree to be the other option on this choice node. Revel in Pain has also been reworked. Instead of being totally tied to your Fiery Brand, it's now just your fire damage gives you an absorb shield, and this absorb shield gets doubled when Fiery Brand is active. So I don't know if this one's going to be super useful. I feel like this one might be kind of patty healing, very similar to Soulmonger's, a little bit of patty healing. It's probably going to help in some way, especially if you have both of them up, potentially valuable. But still, it's interesting to see. I think Soul Barrier is looking pretty interesting for sure. We don't have a lot of context on what health values are going to be, or what the scaling on this ability is going to be like. Really interesting to see as well. Again, with Blood DK in this spec, they've been targeting a lot of baseline durability, reducing the ramp time specifically for Vengeance. It's going to be really interesting to see how these specs actually play out. They are reducing the ceiling a bit, which, is a little bit scary, especially for, someone like me who likes playing at a very high end. But obviously this is good for getting people into tanking and kind of reducing how much they have to learn about a spec up front, which is obviously good for newer players. So we'll see how this works out. I really want to actually play these, in some dungeons on alpha or beta eventually. But for now, I'm intrigued, to say the least. Next up, magic swap to all the Guardian Druid stuff. Boom, we did it. Okay, so general class stuff, not a ton here for Guardian Druid. There's been a little bit of shuffling and a little bit of changes, more than Blood DK, for example. So new talent, Get to the Wild. You'll probably always want to take this. Doubles Mark of the Wild on yourself. Some extra verse, definitely want that. They've redesigned Heart of the Wild. I don't know what the CD is. Like, is this still like a 5-6 minute cooldown, or is it lower? But basically, it gives you like a powerful ability when you're using a different form. So it gives you like a burst of cat damage with Feral Frenzy. It'll give you a burst of Moonkin damage for Falling Star. So potentially the return of like Cat Shift, Heart of the Wild, Cat Shift, Boomkin, or Boomkin Shift, Heart of the Wild for some extra damage. Not totally sure what the actual value on this is going to be, but I definitely like this better than the old version, assuming it's not like a 5-minute CD. Other than that, Nature's Vigil has been removed. It's now just Innervate Renewal has also been removed. The passive version of it is still available. That was the defensive that was purged for Druids as a class, was Renewal. So you still have this passive version, but you don't have the active version. So something to be aware of. Otherwise, not really a ton of changes. I think they buffed Matted Fur by a bunch, but I don't know if it's going to be super valuable. It's also a 2-point node now. Otherwise, not really much changing for Guardian. Please, I beg, don't make this this little funnel here. Please let me pat down here without having to talent Soother Cyclone. Now, in terms of Guardian Druid itself, let's talk about that for a second, because it has seen quite a few changes here based on the actual notes. So what are their goals for Guardian Druid? They want to smooth out the rage economy. It's very oversaturated in their cooldowns. They want the spec to be less cooldown reliant, and they want to generally improve the baseline abilities of the spec while smoothing out that rage economy. So we've seen some shuffles here. Baseline, big Survival Instincts, back to 2 charges, baby. We are so back. We do not need to spec into 2 points to get 2 charges Survival Instincts. You just have them. So nice to see there. Something I don't really like, I think, is this row here. So they've kind of shuffled around again. I can show the Guardian tree here. So here they have basically a bunch of utility talents now. So it's front of the pack. Persistence, which is essentially now you have armor in cat form when you shapeshift out of bear form. Now it's all forms, honestly, but this was removed from Druid of the Claw specifically and put here instead. Then you have Dream of Scenarios, and you have Infected Wounds. So my problem here is you have niche utility ability, utility, niche utility again, and then niche off healing ability. I don't like these are the 4 choices, and you need to take 2 of them to path down. There are very likely situations, for example, that both of these are not good, or that this is like pretty mid and this is fine. For example, at least this one has some passive bonus at all times, but it still kind of feels a little bad where you're basically every other spec gets to pick some sort of throughput stuff to move down, and here it's almost all just like utility or something that you don't want at all. Don't like that. What I do like is the changes to Berserk, which are now 1 button. Thank God, we've been asking for this for a long time. Berserk has now been rolled to 1 button. It's lost some of the benefits, but it is now 1 button to get CDR on your Mangle, Thrash, Growl, and Frenzied Regen. No additional benefits on top of that, which of course do trickle down to no additional benefits on Incarn that you would have gotten from some of the other Berserk talents. But I am happy to see it be 1 button, and I am happy to have power taken out of Incarn if it means power moved to the rest of the spec. So I don't have a problem with that change specifically. Moving down here, going to get a bunch of new talents in this middle area of the tree here, as you can see on the right-hand side. So Thorns of Iron is gone. Again, a talent that probably shouldn't have existed. It was kind of a bit weird, right, to prioritize overcapping your armor, or going beyond the armor cap rather. No defensive value gained from pressing Iron Fur. You're just strictly pressing it over an ability like Maul, which you should be pressing for offensive as a rage dump, just to actually do some damage. So that's been gone. That toxic gameplay is gone. Instead, it's just whenever you have Iron Fur, you get 5% mastery. Much healthier for gameplay, in my opinion, for the spec. And again, pushes some priority back into actually using Maul again. So that is good to see. In my opinion, I like having Maul as a button and Raise as a button. So I'm happy to see that. We have some defensive options, I believe, over here, where Ward of the Forest is this new talent where you can have Barkskin increase your max health but reduce its duration. So potentially if you need just a little bit more power in Barkskin, I honestly don't see this being used ever, just because Barkskin is already so powerful on its own, especially if you take this talent here, Reinforced Fur. It's like a 40% DR on a super short cooldown. I don't know. I don't see Ward of the Forest being super valuable, but Brambles is right there anyway, so you don't need to necessarily take it. Plus, you can actually path down this way with Soul of the Forest, which you probably are always going to be taking regardless. Obviously, this is a new spot here. The middle has, after the Wildfire, moved into it, as well as Ursoc's Fury, 2 talents that are attack power based that have been kind of bad all of War Within after these scaling adjustments to health versus attack power scaling. So I would like to keep an eye on these talents. These talents in their design are not bad. They were just tuned exceptionally poorly throughout the War Within, so I am looking to see these be tuned better going into the Midnight expansion. So hopefully that will be the case. Moving down here, that's where reinforced fur is, rather. So pretty accessible, a talent you probably want in almost all cases. The extra 10% DR on bark chin, very valuable. And that's going to lead to Circle of Life and Death in the middle here instead. On the right side here, we have Scintillating Moonlight, the Moonfire DR, which was previously in the capstone, basically too expensive to take. This now might be just a take in all situations talent because of where it is. It's in a very accessible spot right off the top of the middle area of the tree, and it's definitely better than what it's competing with, especially when you look at, if you want to path down the left side and the right side of the Guardian tree, which is historically what you've done. The other 2-point note here is Memory of Ysera, which is just some passive self-healing based on rage spent, and you almost always would just rather have 10% DR than 2% max health per 40 rage spent. So this is definitely going to be a very interesting talent. Moving down, though, speaking of interesting Moonfire talents, we have a new ability, and this is called Red Moon. This replaces Moonfire, is my understanding. Yeah, here it is. Replaces Moonfire. It's a 30-second CD. So this is their answer to single target Moonfire damage, I'm guessing. Obviously, Elune's Chosen had been lacking in single target damage compared to Druid of the Claw all expansion, and it'll be interesting to see what this does in terms of closing that gap, because I assume anything that will buff Moonfire will also buff Red Moon, and so this is this debuff you put up on a single target on 30-second CD, you extend it with Mangle. Doing that also generates Rage, and then when that is combined with Galactic Guardian, you gain these charges of Lunar Wrath, where spending Rage deals additional damage to the target and then also heals you. So it'll be interesting to see. I am really interested to see how this affects like Elune's Chosen damage output in single target specifically, if it does kind of close the gap. Also, if this is just going to be something that also Druid of the Claw wants, and they're like, yeah, no, this is nice for Elune's Chosen, but it just makes Druid of the Claw also even more ahead. We'll see. It needs some testing, but I like the idea. I like what they're cooking here. Now, you will notice Galactic Guardians in the capstone area here. Lunar Beam has been moved up to the previous area where the old Berserk node was. On the other side, you have the Rend and Tear Untamed Savagery node, so much more accessible to get these talents. Again, really, really, really happy to see that. In the bottom left area, we have Raise, which is replacing Pulverize. That is now gone. Another ability that's gone is Rage of the Sleeper. And in this area in the middle here, we have two actually new cooldown buttons, which are kind of interesting. So first up, Sundering Roar. You press this button, deals some AoE damage, resets the cooldown of Thrash, and allows it to stack 5 additional times for the next 12 seconds. And then when it ends, any excess stacks you have immediately blow up and deals their damage. So some burst damage here, as well as some additional DR when compared with Rend and Tear. The question mark is, how quickly are you going to be able to stack up the Thrash 5 additional times, and how much defensive value are you actually going to get from that? Maybe a little bit if you time it right, but there's also like a decent amount of burst damage at the end of that 12-second window. To help gain with Thrash stacks, you have Waking Nightmares, another cooldown, which we don't actually know what the cooldown of this one is specifically. I believe this one is 60 seconds. This one I don't know has a duration on it. Yeah, there's no cooldown here listed in the notes either. But basically, when you do this, you summon a Shade. This Shade pulses for AoE damage around it, uncapped it appears, and also mirrors your Thrash cast. So again, very good in AoE, potentially good in combination with Sundering Roar to stack up Thrash really quickly. Interesting. I do kind of like the ideas here better than Rage of the Sleeper. I think it's much more interesting, so that's cool to see. We'll need to see again how it actually plays out in practice, but with Red Moon, Waking Nightmare, Sundering Roar, I'm liking what they're cooking so far here for Guardian. I want to test it, obviously. I want to see what it's like, but I think they're off to a pretty good start. I'll probably put out a longer video on Guardian Druid in a few weeks once we know more and more stuff is out. The Apex talent is out. Obviously, that's not out for Guardian, but a good start. So actually, some other interesting things here. Harness rate, so you can get a second charge of Mangle, and then guaranteed gore procs when Maul or Raise is used above 80 rage. Pretty interesting. And they've also made Ursul's Warding, the magic damage reduction equal to your armor, a single point for the 2-point value currently. That was pretty undertuned talent for 2 points, so glad to see that get buffed. So overall, I think Guardians are tentatively pretty excited with the changes. There's still some spots to improve for sure, but I think these changes are generally pretty interesting, and I will be happy to see how they end up playing out. Let's talk Brewmaster next. Magically appear. Okay, so the monk tree has not changed a ton. It's pretty similar. Some of the talent nodes specifically have seen some adjustments. So first up, Rising Sun Kick gone for Brewmasters. They've removed it for Brewmasters instead. I believe it's Stagger. Yeah, so you just pick Stagger here up with your default point to Stagger instead of Rising Sun Kick. -1 ability to worry about. I believe baseline they've increased the single target damage of Keg Smash on your prio target to, I guess, make up for that. But yeah, no Rising Sun Kick, -1 ability. Vivacious Vivification doesn't do a healing amp on Vivify anymore, so something to keep in mind for some of the off healing or whatever of Brewmaster, even self healing if you're using it on yourself. The big thing is Diffuse Magic is gone. So the talent point has been redesigned to now add the magic redistribution effect or transfer effect to Fort Brew, but this is the ability that's been collateraled for monks. And so that is a little bit sad for Brewmaster losing access to that. And I believe they also lost access to Dampen Harm. I don't think I've seen that anywhere. I believe it's gone. So something to keep in mind for Brewmaster is you are losing a couple of those abilities there. In terms of the actual Brewmaster changes here, again, we have that little notice here, the blue post. Their goal here: broaden the niches of the current kit, reduce the number of those abilities doing those niches, and concentrate the power into the remaining ones. And their goal here, again, make it less difficult to learn and understand the spec, as you know, this was a bit more complicated. So let's go through the actual changes to the tree here. First up, Weapons of Order stuff, it is gone. Instead, in the bottom right, that's where you got Dave. Dave is down here in the bottom right. You got the Zhao Invoke. You got the Stomp down here. You've got a new Mastery effect, passive Mastery doubled when you have Invoke the Ox. And then you still have your proc, Walk with the Ox, out here, so you can still get your Ox procs without needing to commit to getting Ox. So potentially interesting choices there. In the bottom left, they've gone with Exploding Keg related stuff. So you've got obviously Exploding Keg itself, but then you also have a recent cooldown of Keg Smash. You also have this choice node here where it can empower your next Keg Smash or let you cast it again to throw 5 additional kegs and CDR your brews. So leaning more into the Exploding Keg. And that's fire damage, of course. We're seeing a lot more fire damage coming from the root tree here. Obviously, you got Special Delivery and Rushing Jade Wind up here, and that is now amped by this new central node where Ox used to be, Celestial Flames, where when you drink brews, you have a chance to coat yourself in Celestial Flames, and that's going to empower Special Delivery to deal more fire damage, or empower your Rushing Jade Wind to deal more fire damage. And this all kind of combined with a new defensive node down here, Vital Flame, where you heal for 50% of all fire nature damage dealt by your spell's ability. That's a pretty high number. So it's a high amount of leech, especially considering you're gaining a bunch of extra fire damage. You obviously have the Breath of Fire stuff as well over on this left side. And there's also a new talent here in Jade Flash, which empowers your Jade Lightning and makes it AoE, but on a 60-second cooldown, which obviously is nature damage, which would also feed into this talent, which is kind of interesting to see. So will be cool to see a more fire-focused Brewmaster if that's something that ends up happening. Because with a 50% fire leech, and if you do a lot of fire damage, that could be a large amount of healing to help counteract the staggered constant damage that you're taking, which is very, very cool to see. Now, obviously, Ox Stance used to have 3 nodes over here on the left. It's now just a single node. Just the base node of Ox Stance still exists, so it's still there if you want it. But these extra nodes, which honestly were very rarely taken, are just gone. There is a new choice node here. Press the Advantage has been kind of simplified and then moved up to the middle of the tree on a choice node with Blackout combo. So, you know, you're going to have to pick between the two, though I don't think people were really taking Press the Advantage anyways, but it is still an option there. The other major change is related to your brews. So the brews are the same. They've actually been, I believe the base absorb value doubled, increased by 100% if I remember correctly here. Yeah, there it is. Here it is. And then Purified Chi has been removed. So you're no longer managing those. Again, simplifying what you're actually doing here. And also on that topic, so we didn't cover this when we talked about Blackout Combo. They've removed some of the like worse options. For example, you know, you can no longer combo with Celestial Brew, Celestial Infusion, Purifying Brew, Breath of Fire. It's now mostly just the combos that you wanted to use anyways, Tiger Palm or Keg Smash. So a little bit easier to not mess up this ability.
Other than that, it's all like fairly minor text changes or minor actual how the talent work changes to make them more clear, again, more simple, and then a bit of a shuffling around of where the talent points are. Now, Brewmaster is the other tank here that has their big Apex talent available, and this one revolves around Cake Smash and either or empowering your Cake Smash rather, or healing yourself based on damage taken. So when you use a brew, 20% chance to leave you with empty barrel, which is tossed along with your next Cake Smash. Deal some extra damage to your target. Physical damage is just increased. Empty barrels now ricochet and cleave 2 extra targets, dealing 20% reduced damage on each bounce. A little bit more AoE damage there with that. And the final point is when you cast Fort Brew or Celestial Infusion, you tap a fresh keg, granting yourself and 2 nearby allies a refreshing drink and leaving you with empty bottle. Upon taking damage, automatically consume a refreshing drink to heal for a hot amount. So a little bit of damage, a little bit of healing. Not super, like, it's not like a super cool effect in my opinion, but it could be powerful throughput wise. We'll have to wait and see. I definitely don't get the same wow factor as I did from like the rune weapon chance to proc from Blood Decay. But again, this could just be better if the Blood Decay one is a bad proc chance. Just have to wait and see based on testing. But this is the Apex talent for Brew. Again, just the spec definitely a little bit more simplified. That's kind of the general pattern across the board here, it seems. A little bit lower barrier to entry, but a little bit less overall ceiling with some of the changes. But I think the biggest thing is, how do these specs actually feel to play, which we'll find out over the course of the alpha and beta. And of course, we'll see what other changes they end up making. Next up, let's skip ahead to Prot Paladin. There you go, Prot Paladin. So class tree changes, not a ton. They have changed Blessing of Dusk and Blessing of Dawn and then split them up to be 2 nodes where you have Dusk over here, Dawn over here. Dusk is just 10% damage taken decrease, increasing as your health decreases, so it's not anything you need to like maintain. And similarly, Blessing of Dawn is also a passive when you're above 85% health, where you take some of the damage of your allies within 20 yards until you've reduced or gone below that threshold. So nowhere near as much power in Blessing of Dusk and Blessing of Dawn. They're not going to be 100% guaranteed pick talent, and you're going to have to kind of go to different spots in order to pick them up anyways. The other ability here that has changed is this Vengeful Wrath ability, which was where Zealot's Paragon is. I believe Zealot's Paragon is just gone. It's been removed. That was the Wings extension. Instead, Hammer of Wrath here is going to get a bit of a damage increase. With it being higher, the lower health the target is, so more powerful execute damage. But we did potentially lose Wings extension, which, again, maybe we're not going to be happy about this moving to the Prot tree, all my Prot Paladins, but let's talk about it real quick here. So this has been a pattern, as I said, simplifying of things for these specs. And for Paladins, what they said they wanted to focus on is to, one, reduce the number of kind of competing ability priorities early on in combat, where you're like, I need to get threat, I need to drop consecrate, I need to generate holy power in order to use my spenders, that kind of thing. So they want to address that. The other thing is they want to reduce the number of short cooldown abilities and defensive layers that are required for you to survive. And again, similar to the Vengeance and Blood Decay situation, where they want to increase your kind of base durability. Now, that does come with some significant hits to Wings. As we saw, the extension of Wings does seem to be gone. The other thing is the CDR on Wings is also kind of gone. So previously, just Holy Power abilities would reduce Wings and Guardian of Ancient Kings. Now, this is just a flat 50% reduction on the cooldown of Wings, but also a 40% reduction of the duration. So potentially valuable if you need Wings more frequently, as it's now going to just be the baseline 2-minute CD for 25 seconds. That is it. That is exactly what it's going to be. You're not going to be able to have skill expression to extend it, to CDR it. So it's a bit more simpler in that regard. Similarly, Resolute Defender, previously Ardent Defender and Divine Shield CDR, that is also been changed. It's no longer CDR, it's just flat duration Ardent Defender. So you're going to get less value out of things like Final Stand or just bubbling mechanics in general, because you're not going to be able to CDR it nearly as much. Your only source of CDR comes from the passive Uther's Council. Now let's talk about some probably positively received changes. We're going to scroll down here. We're going to find the Mastery change. Here it is. Mastery Divine Bulwark has been reworked. So it now just baseline increases your chance to block melee attacks by your mastery value, and then your chance to block spells and periodic effects by 2 times your mastery value. You do not need to be standing in Consecrate, is my understanding. So no longer are you defensively Jailed to your consecrate. The days of that happening are done. Prot paladins have been freed, but at what cost? Kind of going hand in hand with this are the spell block stuff, as we talked about here. It's no longer tied to consecrate. Obviously, there was this whole shenanigans of hitting 100% spell block in this expansion, the War Within. That's also been changed because the spell block talents here, Barricaded Faith, Faith and Light, they're gone. They've been removed. In its place, in this right side of the tree, are a lot more talents related to consecration, specifically increasing its damage and healing, now that it is just essentially a damage and healing ability and no longer a defensive ability. So you got just heals you for 100% of the damage, double damage and single target. This is a 2.0 now, lasts longer, does more damage, right? So much heavier focus on the actual damage aspect of consecration now that it's free. I think Sanctuary, yeah, it's been dropped down here. This is now the only defensive boost you can get to Sanctuary, where it's just a 5% DR, plus you have 4 seconds of the 5% DR when you leave consecration. But you don't need to take this. This replaces Bastion of Light. Again, they're doing their best to kind of prune some of those short cooldown abilities as well. Bastion of Light gone. Moment of Glory gone. Moment of Glory has been replaced by Cleaving Judgment. So again, we saw that Cleaving Death Strike. We're seeing Cleaving Judgment as well. Definitely a nice ability to see. The Double Judgment charge is now more accessible as well up here near the middle of the tree right next to Wings. So nice, easier to get. Don't have to commit all the way down here in all this consecration stuff in order to actually get it. New talent here, another consecration ability, replacing that old spell block ability, the Searing Sunlight related to Avenger Shielded Consecrate. So a bigger emphasis on that, a little bit more trickle healing as well for the spec. When you have the consecration healing, you have the Avenger Shield making consecration heal. You have this talent over here where your refining fire dot is also healing you. So some access to that trickle healing. Is it going to be super valuable? I'm not really convinced that those nodes are going to be, but we'll have to see what the tuning is. Some interesting thing that does happen because of the changes to Wing specifically is the relative power of Sentinel has gone up significantly compared to Avenging Wrath, just because you're no longer super punished for it being 5 seconds less, right? Because you don't have that massive feedback loop of you want to be in Wings as long as possible. The longer you're in Wings, the more you can CDR Wings, which gives you more overall Wings uptime, right? That feedback loop is deleted. It's gone. And so you're just basically got the flat 25 seconds versus the flat 20 seconds. And so you don't feel nearly as bad playing Sentinel. You probably will see a lot more Sentinel being played in general, if I had to guess, going into next expansion. So something, I guess, a positive for Sentinel enjoyers there. But yeah, definitely it's going to feel pretty different to not be nearly as tied to Wings as you've been historically, at least for the last couple of expansions. So we'll have to see how that actually plays out. Oh, almost forgot. Eye of Tears gone. Yeah, Eye of Tears has been deleted. You can get a second charge of Goak. Templar now revolves around Divine Toll instead of Eye of Tear, which, again, I'm going to say this is a W. I'm going to say this is a W. I didn't like that you had to go all the way down to the cap zone and commit 2 points in order to actually get your ability for Templar. Templar is now way freed up. There's not 2 points you have to commit here. It's in the class tree where you get Divine Toll, and you're going to be taking in every prop Paladin build anyways. And you get to potentially get a second charge of Goak if you want it. So I think that's a good change. I'm happy to see that change, honestly. And again, ability pruning. So you've lost Eye of Tear, you've lost Bastion of Light, and you've lost Moment of Glory. Did you always take those abilities? No. And they're just trying to baseline reduce the number of short cooldown abilities that you would have at your disposal anyways. That brings us to our final tank spec, Prot Warrior. Boom, teleport. Okay, here we are. Pretty substantial changes to the class tree, as you can probably see if you're familiar with the Warrior class tree. Basically, their note here is that their Warrior tree has been overloaded with damage effects since its inception, and they want to kind of peel back on that and make it more, survival, utility, interesting choices. So things like Thunderous Roar have been deleted. The extra bonus capstones to Avatar and to Champion Spear are gone. Avatar has actually been moved out of the tree. It's now in the spec trees. And you have Anger Management has been moved from the spec trees out here instead. So they've been like a little swap. So you still have both Avatar and Anger Management as Prot. Don't worry about that. But it's just they've changed the towns that are accessible out here. Spear has also been kind of made Ursul's-y, it seems like, just from reading it, where you have this area, it'll pull enemies towards it, and then when they're chained, if they'll try and run away, and it'll pull them back to the spear again. It seems like it only does that one time though, instead of permanently for the entire duration. Something to keep in mind. But a big thing they're doing here with the Warrior tree, again, utility orientation, which is something Warriors have been lacking. and that is related to shouts. So they're kind of empowering any shout related abilities. So first off, over here, Berserker Shout, way easier to actually get down here. And it's just, obviously 20 yard with 1 point commitment. Piercing Howl is also a move speed on a 24-yard radius as well, right off the bat. Intimidating Shout has had its target cap removed. You have a new stop here, warriors. Let's go. Rallying Cry is the same, but all of these shout abilities, couple things. One, you can make them last 20% longer here with Resonant Voice. And two, in the bottom corner here, you have Battlefield Commander, which empowers all of your shouts. So your battle shout is going to give you 3% attack power. Boom, want that immediately as a warrior. Your Rallying Cry is going to give leech and move speed to everyone. So all of a sudden, Rallying Cry, which has been a pretty lackluster ability, is now potentially a really, really good ability that where you need a little bit of defensive on the move, and you're also getting leech at the same time. So very, very good there. Piercing Howl, much bigger radius. Berserker Shout, again, radius increase. Intimidating Shout, cooldown reduction. So much more emphasis on these shouts, which I think is cool, interesting. Definitely happy to see them focus on warrior utility, because historically that's something that's been very, very lacking. So I'm a big fan of these changes specifically. Now, one thing I do want to note quickly here before we move to the prot tree is related to anger management. As I said, it swapped places with Avatar basically in the trees. So Avatar's in the prot tree. Here, this one's in the class tree. Notably, though, it only CDRs Avatar for prot. It does not CDR Shield Wall. And so Shield Wall is going to be obviously a much longer cooldown now that you have no other way to CDR it aside from Impenetrable Wall, which was a talent that you weren't currently tanking because the other talent was so strong, giving you the second charge in the flat CDR. And so that actually does potentially give a use case to Impenetrable Wall now, because there's no other way to CDR Shield Wall, so it's something to consider. They did buff Honed Reflexes to be a 10% CDR flat instead of 5%, so that will help a little bit with your Shield Wall, but you are going to just generally have likely less Shield Wall uptime because of this change, so that is something to keep in mind. You'll also notice a familiar icon right next to that in Last Stand, which is now no longer an on-use ability. It's been taken out of the prot tree, moved to the class tree, and it's a passive, very similar to the renewal passive from the Druid tree that we talked about earlier, where it's just going to proc when you're at low health and give you a bit of a heal, and this has a 4-minute CD. So again, -1 button, little bit of defensive boost here, but something that I could see people avoiding, but I think it's going to be pretty solid overall. You're probably going to want to take this in general. All right, now Prot Warriors did get a change in 11.2, and broadly they said they're pretty happy with the spec rework that it got back then. So there's not a ton of changes, probably the lower end of overall changes to the spec tree here out of all the tank specs, which is kind of understandable, but we still have some new talent points. We still have some things shuffled as we talked about, and a little bit of a rework here to a couple of them. But you notice the shape is like exactly the same. It's identical. There's no difference to the actual shape, but a couple different things. So first off, Revenge baseline replaces Slam. Slam's gone. No, don't know why we had it anyways. And it's now baseline dealing damage to your target and then 2 other targets. And now you can opt to talent into this talent here to make it uncapped enemies in front of you, but reduced beyond 5. Or you can just keep it as this cleave version of Revenge and not need to invest that talent point. Or if you're not heavy into using Revenge, you don't need to invest in that talent point either. Best Served Cold, very easy to get. This was previously, I believe, Brutal Vitality and Fueled by Violence. Now that's been split up on the other side. So you got Brutal Vitality, and you have I Can Do This All Day, which is essentially the block version of Brutal Vitality, which is why they're on a choice node. So in situations where you're maybe not nearly doing as much damage output, but you're doing a lot of blocking, you can take that one instead and potentially fill up more Ignore Pains when you're spamming Ignore Pain. Similarly, in a situation where you're in a raid and maybe you're not actively tanking the whole time, or you're just not taking blockable damage, Brutal Vitality is the choice there. And then Fueled by Violence has therefore been separated, so you now have the ability to take both Brutal Vitality and Fueled by Violence for a little bit more sustain. On the topic of Fueled by Violence, bleed damage dealt by Rend and Deep Wounds here. The big thing is Deep Wounds is different. So Deep Wounds has been changed. It's now a talent node here, and it's applied off of Execute, and when it's reapplied, the remaining damage is added to the new Deep Wound. So it's effectively this like bleed that you ramp up in terms of damage if you're executing, particularly obviously in execute phase, or with sudden death if you're taking that. So the power of this bleed has been increased in terms of the actual output of it. So we'll have to see how this kind of synergizes with deep wounds. Obviously, there's a little bit of anti synergy because you can't take sudden death, bloodborne, and deep wounds and fueled by violence. So you have to pick between bloodborne and sudden death. So that's something that'll impact that. But more interesting than this was like 15% execute damage before. So I like that. They've changed blood surge to go off rend, of course. Now that's going to be something that you're going to be using more often than deep wounds. Also notably, rend has moved to the class tree with the blood and thunder, whereas before it was here, so you don't need to worry about getting that anymore. Of course, there's Avatar, like I said, in the position of anger management. We still have Bolster out here. It makes the Last Stand proc a 3-minute CD instead of 4-minute, and also grants you shield block for the duration. I feel like I'd like to see this changed. I don't know. It feels like a very, like, you would never pick this talent, right? With how the current passive Last Stand works. So I think this just needs to be changed into something else. And like I was saying earlier, Impenetrable Wall potentially has more value now that you are not CDRing Shield Wall passively. So you have the flat CDR versus Defender's Aegis, or more CDR through Impenetrable Wall. So maybe there is a world where you would take Impenetrable Wall now, but the current prop war is just Defender's Aegis all the way. We'll have to see how that changes. But like I said, relatively light on the overall changes. Somehow Spellbreaker still exists in this form. That also hasn't been changed. So maybe we should get that changed as well. But lots of changes overall to tanks, as we've seen, both in terms of baseline and also to the talent tree. Of course, all of this is a work in progress, but I would love to know what you guys think about these changes. Are you excited about some of these changes? Are you happy? Are you unhappy? Would you like to see some more changes added on? Let me know what those would be down in the comments below. And of course, make sure you are subscribed for more Midnight Alpha content, including that video going over all of the hero tree changes for the 12 relevant tank hero specs, which will come out in the next day or so, because we're already at like an hour almost in terms of recording. And yeah, that's probably a bit long to add them into this video. Of course, none of this would be possible without the support of my amazing Patreon. So thank you guys so much. Otherwise, I appreciate you guys for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.